Hi everyone, this is the long-awaited story of Grandma Mary, so let's get into it. Grandma was born March 13, 1927 in Worcester, Massachusetts. Her father was a shoemaker and her mother was a homemaker. Her parents fled the Armenian Genocide in 1915, came to Greece, and from Greece they came to Massachusetts. She is one of 5 sisters and the last one left. She grew up during the Great Depression, and when she was about 5 years old, her family moved to Chicago. Her dad had a shoe shop, and they actually bought a home with a beautiful balcony that had a view of Wrigley Stadium. My grandma would also help her dad sell shoes at the shop. She spent her childhood and teens in Chicago, going to school, learning to sew, and going to dance class. In high school, she was also on the swim team for synchronized swimming, and let me tell you, she was good. Grandma was diving into our pool up until she was 87 years old. Like for part 2? Hey guys, this is part 2 of Grandma's life story, so we're gonna do a little history lesson to see what was going on in the world during this time. In 1946, the Soviet Union was just out of World War II and they had lost a lot of people during the war. Armenia was under the rule of the Soviet Union and had fought for them. Armenia also lost a lot of people to the war, so if Armenia went underneath a certain number in population, they would no longer be a state within the Soviet Union, meaning they would be incorporated into another surrounding state. So, through propaganda, Stalin invited Armenians from all over the world, America, France, Syria, Lebanon, and so on to repatriate to Armenia. He did this by promising them free housing, land, plenty of food, and jobs. In 1947, my grandma's father made the decision to go to Armenia. He also wanted to make the move because he was very prideful of his Armenian culture and wanted his daughters to marry Armenian men, as there weren't many Armenians in America during this time. My grandma was 20 years old, studying at Northwestern University, studying to be a nurse. However, because her family was making this move, she left her schooling. From Chicago, my grandma's family went to New York to travel by ship to Armenia. 2 of my grandma's older sisters stayed behind as they wanted to build their lives in America. The total travel time took about 15 days to get to Armenia. Like for part 3? Part 3 of my grandma's life story. In 1947, my grandma's family got to Armenia. They stayed in the city of Gaharan. Although Stalin promised many things, it was all a lie. There was lack of food, famine, and many people were exiled as political prisoners to Siberia. The American Armenians had it the worst, since they were coming from the United States, a land of prosperity. My grandma's 2 sisters who stayed behind in America were facilitating another group of Armenians to travel to Armenia. But as soon as my grandma's family got to Armenia and became aware of the living conditions, my grandma's father sent a letter to my grandma's sister who was living in America to prevent the other group of Armenians from coming. Since Armenia was under the rule of the Soviet Union, they were communist. If you said anything bad about the government, you would face consequences. The Armenian government found the letter that my grandma's father was trying to send to America, and only a couple months after getting to Armenia, they took my grandma's father away in the middle of the night. He was exiled to prison in Siberia and sentenced for 15 years. Like for part 4. Hey guys, this is part 4 of Grandma's life story. After they took my grandma's father to prison in Siberia, my grandma could only write letters to her father in Russian. My grandma didn't know Russian, so she needed someone that could help her. Around this time, an Armenian handyman came to my grandma's house to fix an appliance. And guess who this handyman turned out to be? Bam! My grandpa. He was a World War II Soviet Union veteran, knew 5 languages, including Russian, and was able to help my grandma. A few months later, my grandpa asked to marry my grandma. My grandma said yes, but on one condition, that he take my grandma to Siberia to visit her father. My grandpa was very wise, sharp, and capable. They got married, and he took my grandma to visit her father. After that, they came back to Armenia and continued to live their life together. Prior to World War II, my grandpa was admitted to the National Polytechnic University of Armenia to study engineering, but couldn't continue attending since he got drafted into the war. Although he never got to finish school, he was very sharp. He worked as a mechanic and a general handyman. My grandma worked as a private English teacher. At the time, it was very rare for Armenia to have someone like my grandma living there that spoke fluent English. Her skills were very useful. Like for part 5? Part 5 of Grandma's life story. In 1953, Stalin passed away, so the communist rule in Armenia ended. Because of this, they released my grandma's father from prison in Siberia. Instead of the 15 years that he was originally sentenced for, he did 6 years. 2 months after her father came out of prison, he passed away, as his health had severely deteriorated. My grandma was devastated. To think that her father made this move for more opportunity and a better life, all for it to come down to this. She was 26 years old at the time. Even after Stalin passed away, my grandma and grandpa stayed in Armenia. Life got a little better, and they started building their lives. They had a daughter in 1955 and a son in 1961, aka my dad. Although things were okay in Armenia, they decided to move back to America. In 1966, my grandma, grandpa, and their 2 kids came to Atlantic City. 2 months later, they moved to Cliffside Park in New Jersey. My grandma was 39 years old at this time. Like for part 6? Part 6 of Grandma's life story. In 1966, my grandma and grandpa were living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Cliffside Park, New Jersey with their 2 kids. They were actually on the 4th floor and there was no elevator. My grandpa was working as a mechanic, and in 1969, he bought his own gas station. My grandma would get up super early in the morning every day to help my grandpa at the gas station. Finally, in 1975, my grandparents were able to buy a house in Cliffside Park. In 1986, when my grandma was 59 years old, they sold the gas station in New Jersey and moved to Los Angeles. In 1990, my grandpa bought a gas station in Glendale, California, 6-pump gas station with an auto shop and a snack shop. And get ready for this. The gas station actually burned down the same year. A mechanic was replacing a gas tank in a car, and there were a few drops of gas on the ground. Simultaneously, a new shipment of oil came in. The mechanic was holding a light to replace the gas tank. Dropped the gas tank, with it dropped the hanger light, and boom, an explosion started. It was all over the news. Almost everything burned to the ground. It was a really big setback in their lives as they had been building so much to get to this point, all for it to burn down. My family did what they could to renovate the gas station, but eventually sold it in 1996. Like for part 7.